The wind screamed across the Wyran Wastes, a sun-scorched plain of shattered rock and endless dunes where only the desperate dared to roam. The local miners said the land had once been lush, centuries ago, but something had drained it dry. Now, all that remained were the bones of ancient creatures, half-buried ruins, and the occasional unmarked crater left by fallen debris from the orbital graveyard overhead. Garrett Dorn adjusted the filters on his breather mask and continued his trek across the cracked terrain, boots crunching over brittle stone. His cargo hauler, a rust-streaked, two-wheeled beast called the Crawler, sat parked half a click behind him, lights blinking steadily in the rising dust. He had no reason to venture this far from the settled zone, none except for the strange signal he'd picked up late last night. It had come in weak, erratic, and almost drowned in static. But it wasn't noise. It was a distress beacon. Old tech. Civilian signature. And very faint. He should have ignored it. Garrett had a policy, no distractions. Out here, distractions could get you dead. And yet. He crested the next rise and stopped dead. The crater spread out before him like a scar. Blackened rock curled at the edges, as if something had hit the surface and boiled the stone upon impact. At its center, half buried in ash and debris, was a small pod. Not military. Not even industrial. Just a single-occupant life shell. He moved closer, descending carefully, weapon at the ready. The pod was partially open, its emergency hatch twisted from the inside. Scorch marks licked up the side. Garrett knelt beside it, sweeping away layers of dust, and froze when he saw the tiny hand. Delicate. Clawed fingers. Blue. He reached in gently and pulled the figure free. It was a child. Barely more than a toddler, small and slight, with thin limbs and a strangely elongated head crowned with soft, bioluminescent tendrils. The child's skin was a deep, iridescent blue. Their eyes, when they opened, were solid pools of lavender, wide with fear. The moment the child saw Garrett, they flinched, crawling backward instinctively and baring small, sharp teeth. He raised his hands. "Easy," he said, voice muffled through the breather. "I'm not here to hurt you." The child hissed. Okay, let's try this." He slipped off the mask and set it beside him. His voice came through clearer now. "Name's Garrett. I'm human. You're clearly not. But I don't think either of us wants to be out here longer than necessary." He dug into his pack and retrieved a hydration vial, holding it out slowly. The child stared at it, sniffed the air, then snatched it and gulped greedily. Some of the tension eased. "That's better," Garrett murmured. He looked back toward the pod. "Guess you came down hard. Family with you? Anyone else I should be looking for?" The child didn't respond, but their gaze flicked skyward. Garrett followed the look. A streak of smoke cut through the clouds, far overhead. Another pod? No. Too fast. Too large. And coming down hot. His earpiece crackled. "Warning. Atmospheric entry detected. Object class, orbital dropship. Status, hostile." "Damn it," Garrett whispered. He scooped the child into his arms and ran. They barely made it back to the crawler before the dropship breached the atmosphere. The hull of Garrett's vehicle groaned as he pushed it to full power, kicking up plumes of sand and scree behind them. The child clung to him silently, wrapped in a thermal blanket, eyes never blinking. "Got to get to cover," Garrett muttered. "Someplace they won't scan." He knew of only one such place. The drowned chasm. A series of old mining tunnels beneath the wastes, long since abandoned and partially collapsed. No heat signatures, no active power grids, no comms. Perfect for hiding. And hopefully, forgotten. They reached the edge of the ravine just as the dropship swept overhead. It was matte black, angular, and utterly silent. Not colonial design. Not local militia either. What the hell are you running from, kid? He parked the crawler behind a fallen boulder and carried the child into the chasm's shadow. The tunnel yawned before him, cold and dark. Inside, it smelled of rust, ancient fuel, and damp earth. They walked in silence for several minutes, only the distant hum of the dropship scout drones reminding them they weren't safe yet. Garrett used his wristlight sparingly, watching for cave-ins and unstable ground. Eventually, they reached an old maintenance bay. The door was half collapsed, but he managed to squeeze them through. "We'll stay here tonight," he said. "I'll figure out what to do next." He settled the child on an old cot and unrolled a second blanket. As he turned to start a small heating cell, the child spoke. It was a single word. "Mother." Garrett turned. "Your mother?" The child nodded slowly, pointing toward the ceiling. "She's up there. On one of those ships." Another nod. "Okay," Garrett whispered. He looked at the ruined pod, at the child's shaking hands. "Then I guess we better figure out how to get her back." The next morning, Garrett awoke to the sound of shuffling boots. Too many. He rolled off the cot just as the wall exploded inward. A shockwave of heat and dust threw him across the floor. He heard the child scream. Figures stormed in, tall, armored, faceless. "Secure the target. Kill the human." Garrett grabbed the plasma cutter from his pack and dove forward. A searing bolt of energy ripped past his shoulder. He tackled the first soldier, slicing into their armor with a scream of burning metal. Two more took aim. Then everything stopped. A deafening, unnatural shriek filled the tunnel. The soldiers froze. Even Garrett clutched his ears. From behind them stepped a woman. 7 feet tall. Skin the same luminous blue as the child's. Her hair was a cascade of glowing tendrils, her eyes like burning suns. And she was furious. "Enough," she said, and her voice cracked stone. The soldiers hesitated. "I said, enough." They turned and fled. Garrett stared, panting, bruised, and wide-eyed. The woman looked down at the child, who had already leapt into her arms. "My son," she whispered. Then she looked at Garrett. "You saved him." He nodded slowly. "Wasn't going to leave a kid out here." She stepped closer. "Then I owe you a life debt," she said. "And in my culture, that means everything." She touched his chest. "You are more than rescuer now, Garrett Dorn. You are, chosen." He swallowed. "What does that mean exactly?" Her smile was radiant. "And terrifying. It means you're mine now." The tunnel lights flickered as silence fell over the wreckage of the ambush. The only sound left was the crackling of the ruined wall behind them and the low hum of energy slowly fading from the woman's aura. Garrett sat back against a rusted girder, blood drying on his temple, watching the alien woman cradle her son with an intensity that bordered on feral. "He called for me," she said at last. Her voice was quieter now, heavy with emotion. "Across the stars, I heard him. Even through jamming fields. Even through chaos. I heard him." Garrett nodded slowly. "And you got here fast." She looked at him. "Not fast enough." The child stirred, nestled deeper against her. For the first time since Garrett had found him, he looked safe. The woman pressed her forehead to his. "His name is Corin," she said softly. Garrett gave a small nod. "Mine's still Garrett. You got a name to go with the glowing hair and war cry that shatters concrete?" She studied him, then gave a faint smile. "Virella. First shield of the Varanti matronate." Garrett blinked. "Well, that sounds important." "It was," she said. "Before the betrayal." She stood and helped him to his feet. Her strength was shocking, he felt like a child being pulled upright by a storm. She noticed his expression and tilted her head. "Your kind is dense." Flattering, Garrett muttered. You want to tell me who those guys were? The ones trying to kill me and steal your son? Her face darkened. They are exiles. Mutineers. Once Varantai, now mercenaries who serve the Gar protocol. They struck during the eclipse, took our orbitals, and captured the High Creche. Corrin was one of the few children launched in escape pods. Garrett frowned. You mean, he's royalty? He is heir, she said. And now, they will hunt him until he is ashes. Silence stretched. Then we need a plan, Garrett said finally. They moved deeper into the tunnels. Virella took the lead now, her every movement precise. Garrett could see how she had survived as a warrior. The way she scanned every corridor. The way she never relaxed, not even while holding her child. They came to a sealed bulkhead, and Garrett accessed an ancient control pad. Sparks flew, but the panel hissed open, revealing a long-forgotten tram line. Virella stared at the rusting track. Where does it go? Deep, Garrett said. Old refueling stations. Back before the wastes were dead. We could hide for a while. Virella hesitated. Then nodded. It is better than waiting to be hunted. Garrett climbed into the tram and powered it up. Dim lights flickered. Old servos groaned. With a final screech, the vehicle lurched forward. As they rode, Garrett noticed something strange. Virella was watching him. Not in the way soldiers assessed threats. This was something else. As if she was trying to decide whether he was real. You put your life at risk, she said finally. For a child not your own. For a species not your own. Why? He exhaled. Because nobody else would. Because I lost someone once. I couldn't save her. But this kid? He had a chance. And I wasn't about to let him die cold and alone in a crater. She was quiet for a long time. You walk with pain, she said. It echoes in you. But it has not made you cruel. He looked at her. Is that rare where you're from? It is rare everywhere. They reached the station near midnight. It was half collapsed, but functional. Garrett found a working generator and dimmed the lighting to prevent scans. Virella prepared a nutrient bath for Corrin, chanting in her native tongue while the child bathed in luminous blue liquid that soothed his wounds. Garrett stood nearby, leaning against a support beam. You really believe in this life-debt thing? He asked. She nodded without looking up. Among the matronate, a life repaid is sacred. Bonds formed by it are unbreakable. So what now? You protect me forever. I protect you. I stand beside you. I offer more, if you desire it. That gave him pause. Virella, I didn't save your son expecting anything in return. You misunderstand. I do not offer this as payment. I offer it as acknowledgement. You did what others would not. You risked death for a life you did not know. That kind of spirit is rare. Her eyes shimmered in the faint glow. Among my people, such souls are not merely honored. They are bonded. If they accept. Garrett swallowed. That sounds serious. It is. She stepped closer. Her hand brushed his. But it is also a choice. Their moment was interrupted by a distant rumble. Garrett moved instantly to the control panel, checking the station's perimeter scans. A red mark blinked on the edge of the field. We've got company. One heat signature. Scout. Looks like it. Not a full assault. Yet. Virella handed Corrin a toy carved from old mineral rock and nodded at Garrett. Then we greet them. Together. They made their stand at the outer rail bridge, a narrow metal span that could only hold two at a time. Garrett took one side with his pulse rifle. Virella stood on the other, blades drawn. The scout shimmered into view, a stealth-cloaked figure with adaptive plating. It hesitated at the edge. "Human," it said in a raspy voice. "Step aside. This does not concern you." "Yeah," Garrett said. "See, that's the thing. It kind of does now." It raised its weapon. Varela moved like lightning. The fight was brief. Beautiful. Violent. When it ended, the scout lay broken and bleeding, and Varela wiped ichor from her blade. She turned to Garrett. "They will come faster now." He nodded. "Then we leave faster." She hesitated. "There is another way." "Go on." "My people still have a sanctuary. Hidden in the storms beyond the northern ridge. It is dangerous to reach. But once there, we would be protected." Garrett considered it. "Then we go there." She looked surprised. "You would come with us?" "Yeah," he said. "I didn't save him just to let him die later. And I think maybe you were right. I don't have much left. But I can still stand for something." She stepped close again. "Then we walk as one. Not as rescuer and debt holder. But as something new." She touched his cheek, warm and glowing. "Garrett Dorn of Earth. Are you ready to be more than what you were?" He smiled faintly. "Guess we're about to find out." The next morning came with no sunlight, only the dim gray hue of a rising dust storm creeping across the Wyran horizon. The sky churned with silicate clouds and plasma-charged winds. Garrett stood beside the rusted tram station's exit hatch, securing the last of their gear while the generator hummed behind him. Corin slept strapped against Varela's chest in a sling made of woven armor fiber, nestled against her as if he'd never known danger. Garrett checked his map display and tapped a few commands. "Northern ridge is 70 clicks. Between us and that ridge? Miles of wind traps, ghost dunes, and God knows what else." Varela adjusted the sling across her chest. "The storm front will hide us from scans. That is the only gift the wastes offer." He nodded. "Then let's move before it turns from cover into coffin." The first 6 hours were a blur of trudging footsteps and high-pitched static humming in the air. The storm broke fast, sweeping over the landscape like a living wall. They pulled on rebreathers and thermal cloaks, moving in formation, Garrett in front with the terrain scanner, Varela behind him with Corin cradled tight. Dust bit at exposed skin. The sky darkened to a bruised purple, and sand began to fall like rain, fine as ash. Every few clicks, they passed the skeletal remains of fallen equipment, ruined survey drones, or shattered long-range relays half-eaten by time. "This place," Garrett shouted over the wind, "used to be full of people. Now look at it." "Then let us not join the bones," Varela said sharply. They found shelter beneath an ancient or hauler, long since upended by some unknown catastrophe. Its hold was empty, but the bulkhead provided a windbreak. Garrett sealed a heat canister and set it between them as Corin stirred. The child opened his eyes slowly and whispered something in the Varantai tongue. Varela murmured a response, brushing his tendrils with her lips. "He asks if we are almost there," she said quietly. Garrett smiled, tired. "Tell him, we're closer than we were." They reached the edge of the shattered pass by dusk. The storm had slackened, but they were coated in layers of dust and grit. Before them stretched a canyon, torn by ancient tectonic weapons during a forgotten war. The only crossing was a narrow bridge of jagged stone, partially collapsed. Garrett studied it. "We'll have to go one at a time. I'll go first and test the load." Varela frowned. "You are heavier. Which makes me the better tester. If it breaks, better me than you and the kid." He stepped onto the bridge. It wobbled, but held. One careful step after another, he crossed the span, until he stood safe on the far ledge. He turned and signaled. Varela followed, moving slowly, every step precise. Corin didn't make a sound. When she reached the halfway mark, a low rumble echoed below them. Garrett's head snapped around. Move! Virella sprinted. The edge beneath her heel crumbled, but Garrett lunged, grabbing her wrist and hauling her the last meter across. They fell in a heap, coughing, limbs tangled. You okay? He asked. Yes, she breathed. We are whole. Corin cooed against her chest. And alive, Garrett said. They made camp in a rocky alcove. That night, Garrett sat beside the fire and stared into the flickering embers. Virella joined him after settling Corin against a folded blanket. He dreams now, she said. Of home? I hope. They sat in silence. The storm had passed, but the wind still howled above. Back on Earth, Garrett said suddenly, I had a daughter. Nora. Virella turned. She was 5 when the fever hit. No cure. Just, gone. I left Earth a few years later. Couldn't stand the house. The memories. So I came out here. Figured maybe I could fix machines if I couldn't fix myself. Virella reached out and touched his hand. And now? Now. He looked at Corin, curled safely nearby. Now I get the chance to protect someone again. Maybe that's something. Virella's eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. It is everything. She leaned forward, her forehead brushing his. You carry grief like a warrior's blade. But you wield it with compassion. He let out a breath. You make that sound noble. Because it is. She did not pull away. The next day, they found the sanctuary. It was hidden in a crater ringed with black cliffs, obscured by natural fog vents. Bioluminescent flora curled around stone structures, ancient Varantai ruins, half reclaimed by nature. As they entered, a hum passed through the air, activating defense wards still buried in the cliff walls. Only the royal bloodline can pass unharmed, Virella said. She stepped forward with Corin. The light shimmered. Then parted. They were inside. Garrett followed, eyes wide. This place is a remnant of our greatness, she finished. Inside, old halls led to chambers filled with dormant tech and crystalline altars. Virella placed Corin in a healing pool, and soft energy surrounded him. Here, she said, turning to Garrett, he will be safe. And so will you. And you? She stepped close. I made a vow, Garrett Dorn. To protect you. To honor the life debt. But what has grown between us is not debt. It is choice. She reached up, hand on his cheek. Do you choose me as I have chosen you? Not as guardian and warrior, but as partner. He looked into her eyes. And nodded. Yes. She kissed him then, the kind of kiss born not of impulse, but of earned trust and shared scars. Far above them, in the orbiting wreckage of Varantai stations, something stirred. The Gar protocol had received a signal. The sanctuary's ancient heartbeat had been felt. And they were coming. The stars were barely visible beyond the swirling mist above the sanctuary. Garrett awoke before dawn, the walls humming softly with energy, a faint reminder that even forgotten places never truly slept. He sat up and stretched, every muscle sore from the trek across the wastes. Virella was already awake. She stood near the crystalline altar, her body bathed in blue light as she meditated. Corin lay peacefully inside a containment field of healing mist, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. You slept deeply, she said without turning. For once, yeah. No gunfire in my dreams. You may need that rest. Garrett frowned. Why? She turned then, her expression grim. Because they are coming. The sanctuary's security web confirmed it an hour later, multiple drop pods in low orbit, heat signatures matching Gar strike cruisers. Garrett watched the scan readouts as red dots multiplied on the map. How many? 3 pods, Virella said, arms folded. each likely carrying a full hunter unit. And we can't run. The only exit is the path we took in. And they will have already secured it. Garrett exhaled sharply. So we stand. Varela gave a curt nod. We defend what matters. Garrett glanced over at Corin, still asleep in the healing pool. Then we need to make this place a fortress. The next 6 hours were spent rigging defenses. Garrett adapted power conduits from ancient Varantai systems, patching them into functioning shield nodes and rerouting energy cells. Varela activated forgotten security pylons hidden in the ground, their crystalline tips rising and pulsing. Your people had serious tech, Garrett muttered as one cannon hummed to life. It was not always war, she said. But when it came, we prepared. As Garrett wired the last motion field around the outer ridge, he glanced up at her. You ever think about what comes after all this? She tilted her head. After? Yeah. After we survive. After we protect Corin. After the fighting. She looked toward the child, then back at Garrett. I used to think my life ended with my service. Then with betrayal. But now. I think it continues with choice. With family. He smiled. Sounds better than war. At dusk, the attack came. The first pod streaked across the sky, leaving a line of fire that lit the sanctuary in flickering orange. Then came the second. And the third. The tremors struck seconds later. Positions. Varela barked. Garrett ducked behind a barricade of stone and reinforced shielding, pulse rifle at the ready. Varela stood atop a platform, armored now in ceremonial Varantai plating, silver blue metal etched with runes. The enemy emerged from the mist, Gar commandos in black exosuits, their visors glowing red. They advanced in formation, pulse weapons raised. Don't let them reach the inner ring. Garrett shouted. The first wave hit the mines. Plasma burst upward, ripping into the enemy ranks. The survivors kept coming. Garrett fired, one shot after another, covering Varela as she leapt into the fray. She moved like living wind, her blades singing through armor, her form glowing with kinetic bursts. Hold them. But the second pod deployed heavy walkers, four-legged assault units bristling with cannons. Garrett cursed. Those weren't on the scans. We adapt. Varela shouted. He sprinted to a power conduit and rerouted energy into the sanctuary's core, overloading the defense field. It flared, then pulsed outward in a shockwave. The walkers stumbled. One collapsed. The other reeled. Varela seized the moment and drove a shock spear through its undercarriage. It exploded, taking 2 commandos with it. Garrett dropped to one knee, panting. Still standing. Varela turned, blood splattered but grinning. Always. They fell back to the sanctuary's heart by nightfall. The first wave had been repelled, but the second was massing. We can't hold another full assault, Garrett said. Then we do not. Varela moved to the ancient altar and placed both hands on it. The crystals shimmered, glowing with deep energy. The ground trembled. What are you doing? Calling the deep root. From the walls, ancient pylons unfolded. Runes glowed. A massive pulse of energy echoed across the sanctuary. What is it? She turned. A distress beacon. Not for allies. For ancestors. That doesn't sound like a plan. That sounds like a gamble. She smiled. Sometimes they are the same. The second wave struck an hour later. This time with cloaked assassins and aerial drones. Garrett fought with every ounce of skill he had, picking off targets and shielding Corin, who lay now in a portable field. Varela stood like a storm goddess, her body crackling with stored energy. Then the sky broke. A deep hum filled the air. And the ground cracked open. From beneath the sanctuary, ancient mechs, huge, vine-covered titans, emerged. They moved slowly, but with purpose. One raised a massive hand and crushed a Gar cruiser that had just landed. "The deep root," Virella said breathlessly. "You called giants." "No," she corrected. "I called guardians." The tide turned swiftly. The Gar tried to retreat, but the sanctuary had sealed itself. One by one, they fell to ancient fury. When silence finally returned, Garrett dropped his weapon. Virella stood beside him. "It is done." Garrett looked at the child, still sleeping, untouched by war. "He'll never know what we gave." "Nor should he," Virella said. "Children should grow in peace." She touched his arm. "You fought not because you had to, but because you chose to. That is love. That is strength." He looked at her. "Then let this be our last war." She nodded. "Agreed." And beneath the wounded sky, among the ruins and roots of forgotten greatness, they stood together, warrior, human, and child, alive. The smoke from battle had barely faded when the real work began. The sanctuary, though intact, bore the scars of war. Burned halls, shattered pylons, and broken relics lay scattered across the sacred grounds. But among the ruins, life stirred. Garrett moved with methodical care, hauling debris, patching conduits, and restoring power flow to the healing pools. Corrin, now conscious and alert, followed him like a shadow, mimicking his movements with wide-eyed fascination. The child still spoke little, but his trust was visible in every step he took beside the human who had rescued him. Virella watched them from above, perched on a high stone balcony overlooking the central courtyard. The sight stirred something fierce and tender in her chest. Corrin had lost everything, yet here he was, chasing laughter again. And Garrett, scarred, human, steady, was the reason. She descended in silence, her steps as soft as the breeze that passed through the ancient towers. As she approached, Corrin looked up and grinned. "Mother," he whispered, arms raised. She lifted him with ease and pressed her forehead to his. He giggled, then reached toward Garrett. Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Want me to, huh?" "All right, kid." He stepped in, and together, the three of them stood wrapped in a quiet moment of peace, an accidental family forged in fire. The next week passed in labor and quiet healing. With the sanctuary sealed to outsiders, they worked to repair its systems. Garrett learned more about Varantai tech than he ever thought possible, guided by Virella and the knowledge bank stored within the crystalline archive. Virella, meanwhile, taught Corrin how to control his latent energy, small gestures of command over light and motion. One evening, as the sun bled through the fog vents, Garrett sat alone beside a collapsed archway, oil-streaked and sore. Virella approached silently, a flask of cool water in her hand. "You are tired. You think," he said with a smirk. "Could be all the ancient wiring I had to reroute today. Or the fact I just watched a toddler levitate a stone tablet twice his size." She sat beside him. "He is growing fast." "Yeah, and safe, finally." They sat in silence. "You said once your people bond through choice," Garrett murmured. "Not just duty or custom." She nodded. "And that a bond is more than protection. It's about belonging." "Yes." He turned to her. "Then what if I want that bond? Not just with Corrin. With you." Her expression softened, something luminous in her gaze. "Then speak it." Garrett took her hand. "I choose you, Virella of the Varantai. Not because of war. Not because of debt. But because you make me feel like I belong. And I want to build something from this, something stronger than all the ruins we left behind." She pressed her lips to his. "Then we are bonded. Not by force. By fire. By choice." News traveled fast in the hidden channels of the galaxy. Within days, a signal reached them. Not from enemies. But from survivors. A small group of Varantai loyalists had escaped during the Gar invasion. They had taken shelter in a deep space orbital near the Rinth belt. Their numbers were small. Their spirits dim. But when the deep root signal pulsed across the star web, they had heard. Virella stood before the sanctuary's heart with Garrett and Corin as she read the message. They wait for guidance, she said. For a sign that their culture still breathes. Garrett looked between her and the child. Then give them one. She hesitated. I am only one voice. Garrett stepped closer. You're their shield. Their heir's mother. The one who stood when the galaxy burned. That's more than one voice. That's a legacy. Corin reached up and took her hand. Go, the child said. Virella smiled through sudden tears. Then we go. All of us. The sanctuary did not crumble when they left. Instead, it sealed itself once more. Beneath the roots of the earth, the guardians slumbered again, waiting for a time they might be needed once more. And above, the sky cleared just enough for a ship's departure. Garrett piloted the vessel, a patched-together craft outfitted with scavenged Gar drives and Varantai shielding. It hummed like a heartbeat as they broke atmosphere. Corin sat in the co-pilot's seat, wide-eyed. Virella stood behind them, one hand resting on each of their shoulders. As the stars opened before them, Garrett smiled. So where to, my queen? She leaned in. Home. The new kind. The one we build together. He nodded, and the ship jumped into the stars. Epilogue, years later. The Rinth belt became the foundation of something unexpected. A haven. A cradle of rebuilding. Under Virella's guidance, the scattered Varantai were united once more, not through conquest, but through compassion. And Garrett, ever the reluctant hero, became the first human ambassador to the matronate. Corin grew strong. Curious. Bright. Raised by two worlds, shaped by love. And among the stars, stories were told. Of a lost child found in the wastes. Of a human who refused to walk away. Of a warrior who gave more than thanks. Of a family that began when everything else had ended.